Thank you very much. Can you hear me there? I'm on a big screen. I've always wanted to be on a big screen. Well, I'll talk as if someone is there listening. I can't see anybody. Uh, I've been chosen to speak about beauty, of which I know no more than the next person. Uh, but I remember many, many years ago, early in my formation, I think as a Jesuit, read a book by Sertillange called The Intellectual Life. And uh, somewhere in that book, he likens it to a pyramid with three sides: truth, goodness, and beauty. And as long as one is striving to reach the top, uh, from whichever face of the pyramid he starts, he gets close to the others. We'll find at the top there, they're united. Uh, and I think that Joseph Ratzinger Benedict was someone who reached about as far to the top as you can get in this life. And so I think a conference which talks about truth, goodness, and beauty with respect to him makes a lot of sense. I'm still down at one of the bottom rungs, using my fine wine as a propellant. I'm speaking from the Ignatius Press Retreat House in Northern California. We have a little vineyard here, which we tend, and we happen to be right now in harvest time. I'm going to press the Cabernet tomorrow morning. In the meantime, I have to make room for it by drinking some of the previous vintages. Beauty, of course, has several definitions. One is forma or splendor formae, the glory or the radiance of the form. And of course, Balthasar in his Theological Aesthetics, spends 7 volumes talking about this. But I think it's in the life of Joseph Ratzinger, the very form of his life is one that radiates beauty and joy, and I would say holiness as well, and goodness. As you may have heard, I didn't hear the other speakers, but he was born on April 26, 1927, which was Holy Saturday. In those days, prior to the Church of Renewal, it took place even before the Council, the Vigil Mass could be celebrated in the morning. He was born at around 4:30 in the morning. At 8:30, his mother brought him to the Vigil Mass where he was baptized. And he's always thought that was a symbolic moment. I mean, that he was born and reborn in the heart of the Church's liturgical year between Good Friday and Easter Sunday. And he was a person who believed in symbols and in metaphors and parables and so on. And I had a premonition that as his birth was at a significant moment in time and feast, that his death would be too. Of course, he was 95. He lived a long and fruitful life. And he was obviously approaching death, but I was waiting to see when it would be. I hoped I would outlive him. I did. But he died on December 31st, 2022. And that may have some secular symbolism, the end of the year, Te Deum, and so on. But it's a vigil of Our Lady, Mother of God. And so his life, his very structure of his life showed forth the splendor of form, being born between the vigil of Easter Sunday and the vigil of the Blessed Mother. And I was struck that 2 days later, on January 2nd, we celebrate the feast of St. Gregory and Basil, of Nazianzen in Basel. And as you probably know, Basil's brother was also Gregory of Nyssa. So there are 2 Gregorys and 1 Basil. They lived in the 4th century, one of the most difficult centuries in the church, the Arian century. All 3 of them were bishops, scholars, friends. They studied together in Athens. And they were bulwarks of the faith in the 4th century. And I think looking back on three of the men that I've known, have been blessed to know very closely, I think that sometime in the not distant future, there'll be three new doctors of the church. One will be Henri de Lubac, who was born in 1896. His cause has all been introduced. Another will be Hans Joseph Balthasar, who was born in 1905, and then Joseph Ratzinger in 1927. They were friends, kind of a succession of mentors. The Lubac mentored Balthasar, and Balthasar, in a sense, mentored Ratzinger. In his book Milestones, Ratzinger speaks about these two great men of the church to whom he owes so much. And so I think it'll be a completion of a wonderful triumvirate there. And when these three men are sanctified, canonized, and become doctors of the church. Now, that's just my opinion. Of course, it's true, but I can't prove it because it hasn't happened yet. Then 8 days later, your hero and my good friend and hero too, George Pell, had the courtesy to die on my birthday, January 10th. And where I was not saddened by Ratzinger's death, because we're not clinging to this life, we're hope for the joy and beatitude of future life. But I thought Cardinal Pell had some more work to do. Of course, my ways are not God's ways. Would love to have Cardinal Pell be more active at the Synod right now. That would make a difference for sure. I want to compare a little bit Benedict with John Paul II. They're both, one of them canonized, the other one is not yet canonized. Both of them scholars, both of them tremendously inspirational men, but different styles. And certainly John Paul II was a brilliant philosopher, although we published his first book, our first book, one of our first books in his press was his thesis on John of the Cross, and he did it under Gary Lagrange. And I must say, we published it because he wrote it, but I think it was the only feature it had that made it publishable. I mean, it was trying to fit John of the Cross into very narrow scholastic categories, and I don't think it worked. But certainly, Jean Paul II, he grew out of that. He didn't grow out of Thomism. That's not a thing to grow out of, but he did grow out this kind of narrowness of, cold analytics, because he was too much of a charismatic person, both intellectually and athletically and spiritually. But I don't think he had the depth, but not the breadth of Ratzinger. Ratzinger, like his friends, the Lubac and von Balthasar, wasn't just a theologian. In fact, Balthasar didn't get a degree in theology, he got a degree in literature. And de Lubac never got a degree at all. But they read widely, they loved literature, art, music. As you know, Ratzinger played the piano. Mozart was his favorite composer. Again, that's the splendor of form in Mozart, is it not? And so what he does, seems to me, is to unite in himself a great breadth and depth of learning in a person who is so approachable. Bavaria is between Italy and Prussia. And I think it kind of combines some of the positive values, the sharp intellect of the Prussians and the friendliness and joviality of the Italians. And so I call him the universal Bavarian. He was very modest in his dress, but everything about him, just radiated a kind of beauty, really. In fact, I remember when he was, I was part of the famous, not famous, but Schülerkreis, the school circle, the student circle of those who, his graduate students, when he became Archbishop of Munich-Freising in 1977, I think it was. He had about 40, 50 graduate students. Some had completed their studies, others had not. And so we decided to meet with him every year on a weekend. We'd have someone presenting to us. We'd have some seminars. We'd have mass together, meals together. It was always a very, very pleasant experience there to see him do that. And then when he became Pope in 2005, we thought that that was going to cease, But he said, no, no. He said he wanted to maintain that. So we used to visit him there at Castel Gandolfo, usually at the end of August every year. But I remember first time we met with him after he'd become Pope. We were standing there kind of a semicircle. He came to greet us, and he came to me. I looked at him, but then I looked down at his shoes. These wonderfully stylish red shoes. What? Now we have men who wear red shoes in San Francisco, but that's a different thing. It was so, it was a wonderful experience to see that. He wasn't ostentatious. In fact, normally, before he became a cardinal, and even after cardinal, he'd walk across the piazza there, St. Peter's Square, in his black suit and his pectoral cross and so on, and he, look at the cats and everything, feed the cats. He was just a very normal person that way, but he was well groomed. He walked graciously. He had a kind of a courtesy about him. So that splendor forme was something which was embodied in his very being, his bearing. Of course, I saw this also intellectually, the kind of beauty that radiated there in his seminars, the Hauptseminare we had at Regensburg. A good friend of mine, you may know him, Father Vincent Toomey from Ireland, had been a student of Karl Rahner for a while in his graduate studies. And he said, when he went to a seminar with Karl Rahner, with 8 or 10, 12 people there, Karl Rahner would start talking and never stop until it was over. And no one said anything. It was Karl Rahner speaking. The seminars with Ratzinger were quite different. We were from different countries. Some spoke well, and some, like myself, did not. But he rarely said anything for the whole 2 hours until the very end. And he made sure that all of us spoke, even those who were hesitant. I'm not normally hesitant when I speak English, but German is a different story. But he made sure that I spoke and others spoke. And at the end, he would kind of lean back in his chair, look up over our heads, and he would summarize the seminar. And maybe 2 or 3 minutes, maybe just one sentence, but it was 2 or 3 minutes long. And putting everything in its place and organizing it, and everybody's comment, was placed with the right emphasis and so on. It was like watching a conductor with a grand finale of a symphony, gathering all the themes together and making a single beautiful conclusion out of it. And I think that served him well, that ability he had to listen, really to listen to everybody, and then take the best of everyone and kind of put it together. It was really a wonderful talent he had. And when John Paul II appointed him as head of the Catechism of the Catholic Church, the publication of that, I thought it was a perfect choice, because he has that breadth of knowledge and that ability to synthesize things and make a beautiful form out of them. And I'm up here at our retreat house now. Many years ago, like 1995, something like that, after the Catechism had come out, I decided to meditate on the Catechism 8 days. But I didn't get on the table of contents, because it's not just a list of things we believe as Catholics. It's an organized structure. And of course, Ratzinger took the traditional 4 pillars. Nevertheless, the way that beautiful catechism is structured is, again, a testimony to the way his mind works, his knowledge of the faith and his ability to communicate the faith in a way that's harmonious. Another definition, sometimes used beauty, is splendor ordiness, the splendor of order. And I can speak to that a bit. I'm kind of an engineer at heart. One reason I'm kind of pumped up right now is I've just solved a big problem with a spreadsheet that was taking a lot of formulas and things like that. But the other day I did something different, but it was, again, I found a solution. And when you're trying to find a solution to something difficult and then you find it, there's a tremendous peace. There's a great repose in the order that now has been revealed itself in the solution of the problem. And so I think that he himself was very serene, as you probably know. Uh, I only got angry once that I know of. I wasn't there. He actually left the room. He was so angry. That was Carl Rinzig told me this. It was it was Kiko Arguello, who was a wonderful man, but that's a long story. But he really got on Ratzinger's nerves, and Ratzinger just had to leave the room. But it's the only time in my I've known him since 1972. So what's that? That's 51 years. Uh, Always very placid and very composed. Uh, so in the seminars, that love of truth and also that order and organization that manifested the truth with a radiance, that was so evident every time. And by the way, and I've heard so many homilies by him and classes by him. Until he became Pope, I don't recall ever being in a class or hearing a homily where I didn't learn something new. But here's a little story. I don't know how much time I have here, but I'll give a little story here. Uh, there's we had this, I think, the 22nd Sunday of the year or something like that. It's a parable of the 11th hour workers, and that was the text for a Sunday, one of the Schuler Christ meetings, and he gave a homily on that. I've never forgotten it. And Christoph Schönbrunn, my co-student, was there too. He's not Archbishop of Vienna, of course, and Cardinal, but I can't read that passage now without thinking of that homily. And about 20 years after that, I was down in a friend's house, Judge Bill Clark, Southern California. He has a chapel on his property, and Carl Schönbrunn was there. And I was there too. I was kind of celebrating. And it was that gospel. And so Christoph read the gospel. And as he read it, of course, I was thinking back of that homily, actually many, many years ago. And then Cardinal Schönbrunn started his homily. Many years ago, Cardinal Ratzinger spoke on this text. He remembered it too, I wish I could express the beauty of what Ratzinger said to you right now. I can't, but I'll give you the idea that was behind it. I mean, but the way he expressed it was so beautiful, it moved me to tears. Was that he said, those of us who have had the great privilege of being with the Lord in his vineyard from daybreak until the end of the day, sharing his labors, sharing his suffering, sharing his joys, being with them. We have nothing to complain about. If they who come at the last are given the same reward, that's all right. We've been in the vineyard all day with the Lord. It's just a beautiful thought that he expressed there. And of course, obviously I remember it all the time, and so did Cardinal Schönborn. So let's turn to another part of his life, which is probably the best known, most widely known, is his writings. It's interesting. Ignatius Press is the principal publisher of his books in English, but they're not books, most of them, in the sense of a text written from beginning to end continuously. Most of them are collections of essays or homilies or lectures he's given. For example, the great book he wrote in 1967, I think it was, Introduction to Christianity, that was lectures he gave at Tübingen. In fact, it's too bad it's that because he didn't quite finish the Holy Spirit. So we got a meditation on the Creed, and the Holy Spirit kind of got the short end of that stick. But he wrote more about it later on, so I guess he made up for it. But again, that he didn't sit down and write that book. Likewise, to a couple of the great interview books, Vittorio Messori, The Ratzinger Report, Peter Zewald, Salt of the Earth, God in the World. There's only 2 or 3 books that he actually wrote as books. One of them was Milestones, his autobiography up to the year 1977. That's a book, but it's not a theological book. Then, of course, after he was Pope, he wrote Jesus Matheson's Revenge. He did write that continuously as a book. But otherwise, you won't find many things by him that are written as a book from beginning to end. However, of course, when he did give a course of lectures or a series of homilies, he had in his mind that, a theme that he was going to carry through the whole way. And I never saw him look at a note, by the way, in a homily or in a class. He spoke in what would be called drukfähig, ready to print. That's how his mind worked. But there was one book at kind of the center of his theological career, which he did write from beginning to end over about a 10-year period. And during that time, Colonel Schönborn and I and Carl Roulette and Father Chauvet, another Jesuit, had organized a thing called Casa Balthasar, House of Formation and Discernment in Rome. And we've been encouraged to do so by Cardinal Ratzinger. He became our Cardinal Protector. I get trying to slow down because I know I speak funny to Australians. This is this is how we speak in California, and we meet with him once a year in Rome, and he'd come spend a day with us, or an afternoon and an evening. And by 1990, 1991, in the recreation after dinner, we always said, "What's going on with the congregation? What are you working on?" He said, "Well, I'm working on a book now." I said, "Really? What is it?" "Well, I'm writing on the liturgy." Now, at that time, it was a time in my life as a priest where I've done a lot of thinking of my own about what happened to the council, the reform, the missteps that were taken, the need for a reform of the reform, and so on. And so I was very attentive when he said that. And so every year after that, for about 9 years, when we meet, I'd say, "Well, how's the book coming?" He said, "Well, I'm busy, so it's kind of hard. I'm working on it." Well, in 1999, in the fall, I got the manuscript Einführung in den Geist der Liturgie. And I thought, uh-oh. By that time, I kind of formed my own thinking on this. And I didn't want to disagree with him, because if I disagree, then I'm wrong, right? I mean, so I opened that book and I started to read it. And I jumped out of my chair. I gave the victory sign. I said, "This is beautiful, beautiful. All the things I've been thinking are in this book, but they're spoken with such grace and such power, I got the book right here, actually. You'll see if you can. I've kind of, this was a beautiful book, but, because I've been misusing it or using it too much, it's kind of fallen apart. But I think just like his birth was at the center of Holy Week, I think this book, the liturgical book, at the center of his life is his little masterpiece. I think it's the most wonderful book on the liturgy that's ever been written. I think it'll last for centuries if the Lord lets the world go on much longer. We could be ending pretty soon now, the way that it's going today. But and again, the way he celebrated Mass was something. It was, you knew you're in the presence of something holy going on. Just his composure, the gestures he had, just the ars celebrandi, would call it. And I think that kind of epitomizes his life, what he wrote about the liturgy. And you read the book and you see he's always starting with scripture. That's his base for all his thought. And the book is organized so beautifully, as he does. And he is insistent that the liturgy be done beautifully. It has its intrinsic beauty, its objective beauty that can be marred by our misuse of it. But the way he celebrated was always something which let the beauty of the Mass radiate. And I don't know anybody that didn't recognize that. I probably got more stories I could tell you, but let me just conclude now. I'm not sure how long I've gone, but I need a drink here too. But I would say that the hallmark of Joseph Ratzinger, Pope Benedict, is the beauty of holiness. The beauty of holiness. Now, there's many ways of being holy. There's some kind of rugged people like, Jerome, but he was someone whose holiness was manifested in the form of his life and the form of his writings. And therefore, I say, Santo subito, Thank you.